Hello, gorgeous, and welcome to the Women on Top podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and with over 15 years of business experience, I became truly passionate about finding ways to support and hear from way more women. And what we know to be true is that women thrive when they are in their favorite position, on top in business, in relationships, in personal growth, and on top in being real and authentic to who the hell they are. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy the Women on Top podcast. Oh my gosh, I am so grateful to be back for another episode of the Women on Top. And today I have an incredible guest, and we are going to dive into some topics that, quite honestly, I believe need to be talked about so much more. Today's guest is Jenneh Rishe. She is a registered nurse and founder of the Endometriosis Coalition. She also is a chronic illness advocate and best-selling author of Part of You, Not All of You, which I just love that title. After her long road to her own endo diagnosis, as well as other chronic illnesses, Jenneh has really made it her mission and her life's purpose to help raise awareness. She's pushed for policy change, and she really helps women feel so seen in a system that often just overlooks them. And I'm so grateful for her being here today so that we can talk all about that. If you've ever felt dismissed by doctors or nurses or the medical system or unsure of how to advocate for your health, then this conversation is definitely for you. Jenneh, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. So when I was reading about some of your background, it looked like you have always been active. Like you were a competitive runner, you're a nurse, and you were in the process of pursuing your master's degree, I believe, when your own life really changed forever. And it seemed like, I think you went to the ER and then you were having this terrible abdominal pain and really weren't getting any answers. So I'd love for you to kind of just explain what happened here and why you faced such challenges just receiving a diagnosis at all.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, I was very active, probably too active. I like
I
to
relate.
say I'm a recovering overdoer. Like I tried in my calendar being full and scheduled with meetings. And then out of nowhere, everything just stopped. So it was really a paradigm shift for me when I became sick. I was generally healthy for most of my life, nothing that I can report being abnormal, completely normal periods until I turned 27. And then that all changed. Like you said, it was this day that I will never forget. Was driving to work. I was working at UCLA at the time, driving on the freeway, and just got struck with this intense pain in the right upper side of my stomach. Had to pull over on the freeway and just kind of breathe it out and get myself to work. And after that day, nothing was ever the same again. And it really was like a light switch just got put on, and then I was just never well again. Went to the ER. They did their due diligence in doing all the tests that could be, CT scans and lab tests, and kind of set me off with follow up with your PCP, right? Yeah. Which a lot of us get, which, we should follow up with our PCP. But nothing emergent was wrong. And so I took that for what it was. And the pain kind of waxed and waned for another 3 days. And since they didn't find anything emergent, I just kind of lived with it and was like, we'll just see how this goes. Then every month it kept coming back, more intense. And I finally started seeing that it was coming about 2 days before my period every month for 4 straight months. So then I took that complaint to my gynecologist. And based on where I was having pain, like I said, it wasn't pelvic pain. My periods were generally easy, but it was this right upper stomach pain that just felt like someone was stabbing me in the stomach. But based on that location, she didn't correlate how that could be related to my period. So again, I just took that for what it was and said, okay, then it must not be anything, and just kind of lived with it. What months just living with that. Knew when my period was coming because this pain would come, and like clockwork, my period would come and then it would linger for about 3 days and then go away. And I just lived this way for months and months because as far as I knew, all the tests that everyone did were normal. My gynecologist is telling me there's nothing wrong. So I lived with that. And it wasn't until I want to say almost a year later where I started having other symptoms come into the picture that made
Mm.
it hard to ignore that, okay, something's really going on here. And it was things like just feeling really tired, being really constipated, having nausea and bloating, things that were new for me.
Mm.
And it made me realize, okay, I need to investigate a little bit more into what's going on because this isn't just with my period anymore. I'm like feeling badly all the time.
Yeah. And was it at that point that you were able to get a more true diagnosis, or what was the journey from there? Because sometimes even those symptoms you just mentioned can get passed off as anxiety or, I don't know, a lot of different things.
Anxiety is the go-to, right? I think I was lucky in that the first gynecologist that well, now this is the second, I realized this wasn't the first gynecologist. The second gynecologist, now that I had all these other symptoms, I figured, okay, I need a new gynecologist because the last one wasn't very helpful. So I went to a new one and was describing all these symptoms. And at this point, I was having pain with sex as well,
Hmm.
which was new for me.
Interesting.
And she asked me, "Have you ever heard of endometriosis?" So this is the first time anyone's bringing up to me. This is like a year into these symptoms. And I like at first I was embarrassed to say I'd never heard of it before, but obviously being on the other side of advocacy, realizing I probably didn't even really get much education on it in nursing school. I have one of those memories that like if I've heard something, I'll remember something about it. Even if it's not like details, I'll remember. And it's helped me be a really good nurse because somehow I'm able to just like spit out facts and
Yeah.
tell things. So I know if this was a subject that we spent significant time on, like I would have taken something away from it.
Hmm.
But when she said it, it was almost like I had heard it for the first time. And I was like, I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she explains to me kind of what it is, but explains it in a way where it was, like, not that big of a deal, kinda like it was the flu, like,
Hmm.
"Oh, it's, this disease that women have, and we control it with birth control and ibuprofen," and at the time, I'd already had an IUD, so I was like, "Okay, but I'm on birth control," and it was, "Well, let's do pills on top of the IUD."
Oh my gosh.
So it was, "Try this, we'll see how it goes," and set me on my way. Again, just no urgency to it, just like, this is just another day, and that's how I received it, and that's how I lived with it. She didn't make a big deal out of it, so I didn't make a big deal out of it, right? And nothing helped. We switched birth controls, tried different birth controls. I'd probably tried 4 or 5 different ones before finally, it was my primary care doctor. I was doing my annual physical, and it was a new doctor, and we were just going through everything, going through my meds, and I mentioned being on ibuprofen, 800 milligrams. I take it 3 times a day, and he's like, "Why?" I was like,
Mm.
"Well, that's just what I've been doing for the
Yeah.
last
To
year to."
survive.
Yep. And he's like, "Huh," and then he kinda asked me, "Have you had a diagnostic surgery? I know they told you they think you have endometriosis, but have you had a surgery yet?" And I was like, "No." Like, no one's ever brought up needing a surgery. And again, I look back now and there's so many moments where I'm like, how could I have just been so silly and just so trusting? But to my own defense, I was working at a hospital that was world renowned, right? I trusted the physicians there.
Yeah,
In my mind, I'm like, why would I need to do any extra work or due diligence? These
totally.
are world class physicians, right?
Yes.
So if they didn't bring up surgery, who am I to be the one to say, hey, should we do a surgery? Right?
Right.
Well, finally, it's my primary doctor that says, "I think that we need to do a surgical consult, and if this isn't endometriosis, we need to figure out what else this is."
Mm.
And so that's what led me to getting a diagnostic laparoscopy almost a year and a half after my symptom onset and being
Wow.
treated for this thing that we didn't even know for sure that I had.
Oh my gosh. What,
Mhm.
so why do you think that there's still this huge lack of awareness? Like, where is that coming from? Because I don't, I think so many of it, like you're a nurse, but a lot of us are in the same boat. We're just subject to whatever our doctors and physicians tell us, and we trust that. So where is this lack of knowledge coming from?
I think it stems from so many different places, and I think that we have to kinda look at it from 2 perspectives, the medical community and the general public.
Mm.
It's 2 different reasons why both people are not getting the education that they need, right? So when we talk about medical schools and nursing programs, it's as simple as they're just not teaching it.
Yeah.
If they are, it's lumped into a women's health lecture, about anything that's not pregnancy and babies. It's like, and this is the other stuff that happens to women. And it's like a day of lecture, one slide on a PowerPoint, and that's really it. And it's interesting. The more like med students that I talk to, they kind of all share the same thing. Like, we didn't learn this much about endometriosis.
Right.
So no fault of their own. They're just not being educated.
Yeah.
And then with the general public, it's kind of that same thing. We have a hard time talking about diseases that involve things that are uncomfortable or taboo. And sadly, speaking about women's bodies and the way that they function is still a taboo topic.
Yeah.
I even find myself searching for the best words to describe to new people what endometriosis is in a way that's not going to make them be like, oh, I don't need to know anything about this. Like, this
Right.
seems very private, right?
Yeah.
And so we haven't normalized discussing women's bodies. And I said this on a panel I was on last week speaking about women in sports. I was like, they're just bodies. We may, right? Like,
Right.
we all have them, but for some reason, when it comes to how women function, we make it seem like it's this thing that's complicated and we shouldn't talk about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's literally just a body.
Right.
And
Right.
until we like look at women's health issues that way, there's always going to be stigma surrounding them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely like a huge paradigm shift in terms of the way that we talk about it and the culture. I just heard something the other day that somebody was explaining it as endometriosis should not be described as like a gynecological issue, and it should, because it's attached to so many other things. Like, it's not really that's not the only thing that's going on here. And so that's another thing that I thought was really interesting, because I've never heard of it explained that way. And it does, I think there are so many other components of it, right? Like, I'm sure you've learned so much of.
Yeah, this disease it's so much more than a gynecological condition. One, it's been found on every organ in the body, right? So that alone just takes it out of the
Wow.
gynecological.
Right.
I had my diaphragm. So my specific symptoms of that pain in the right
Wow.
up my stomach was because it was my liver was attached to my diaphragm by scar tissue from endometriosis,
Whoa.
right? So because I didn't come in saying I'm having pelvic pain, no one thought, okay, this is cyclical. It's right upper stomach. And then as time went on, it was pain on like my scapula and my shoulder, which I learned was referred pain from sitting on a nerve on my diaphragm. So all of like my clinical picture pointed to it being like a diaphragm issue, but me speaking about it in terms to my period made everyone just kind of be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
And so one, you have, like I said, it's been found on every single organ. It has caused women to lose organs, like physically lose parts of their colon and parts of their ureters and parts of their diaphragms. And so for us to just put it in this box of as gyne when it affects so many different organs, we start out behind, right? In that we're not seeing the doctors we should be seeing.
Mm-hmm.
We're only seeing gynecologists who may or may not have very much experience in it. And then any of the other symptoms that come with it, where they're just kind of like symptom
Right.
management, put Band-Aids on it, where I probably should have been seeing a pulmonologist earlier on, like things like that.
Yeah.
And then we have also learned that it causes an insane amount of immune dysfunction. All of that chronic inflammation actually like changes the way the immune system is responding to this foreign thing that is not supposed to be there. And we've known this for a while, but there's more data coming out that women with endometriosis are more prone to developing an autoimmune disease. And so the question is like, what came first and what is the thing that sets it off to make us more prone to it? I have two now. And I know so many other women who once they get their endodiagnosis years down the road, then they're on this autoimmune journey. And so we're doing it so much disservice by just putting it in that gyne
Right.
box.
Yeah, because it's literally affecting everything.
Mhm.
So, do we know what some of the causes of it are? I know that's probably its own podcast in and of itself, but, from your perspective, do you have more insight on that?
We don't know anything confirming what there are some hypotheses. There's some idea that this is something we're born with, that before that in fetal development, we have these abnormal cells that are laid down, and just like other disease processes, there's something down the line that turns them on, whether that's environment, that's stress, that's chemicals, whatever it is. But we don't know for sure. There's, like I said, there's hypotheses. The way that behaves kind of like an autoimmune disease, but isn't one exactly. So there's still so much work to do in figuring out where this comes from and why.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good lesson for anyone out there too, that this isn't necessarily like your fault. Like I feel like as women, sometimes we take that on as like, oh, what did I do wrong to get this? And I feel like that's a good message, is that it's not your fault necessarily. Like this is not
That's a
something that you
great
caused.
message.
Yeah.
Because I definitely internalized some of that, like you had said before, when this all started, I was in, like, prime of my career, like,
Yeah.
managing a kitchen center, doing grad school after work, running and competing, and I was just like, "Did I push my body to this limit where it just
Mm,
couldn't handle
yeah.
this anymore?" And if I didn't have that stressful job
Hmm.
while I was in school, could this have maybe not come out the way that it did? I definitely felt a lot of guilt and shame around that.
Yeah. How has that, mental journey been for you? Just, I feel like it's probably been all over the board. At least it would be for me, just grappling with this new identity kind of, and that this is my reality. How has that looked for you?
Really hard. And I would say that it is a journey that I am still on because it changes each day. Like, I explain it in that, like, I have the a surgery, and in all senses of the word, I'm in remission from, like, daily endometriosis symptoms,
Mm,
but my body is never going to be the same again. And it was grappling with that was a really difficult part, that
yeah.
what I was before this diagnosis, like, that's not my life anymore. And it made me really kind of sit with this question of, well, who are you? Right? Like,
Yeah.
running was your identity, working really hard was your identity, excelling in everything was your identity, and then I just like couldn't do any of that anymore. So
Mm,
it was this like, who are you now question,
right.
which I think a lot of people come to at some point in their life for some reason or another. But
Mhm.
to be faced with that question at 27, when my life is just starting, and the question of, what if this is what my life looks like forever? It's a daily thing, I think, in that now, like I said, since I have these secondary autoimmune
Yeah.
issues, that's a whole new process of acceptance that I'm trying to live with and deal with. And always going back to, if we had diagnosed and gotten endo figured out earlier, would all of this cascading down the line have ever happened? So I
Mm,
never really get out of that cycle of like, did this have to happen to me? Could this have been prevented? And that's what kind of fuels my passion to keep doing this advocacy work, because I'll have moments where I'm like, okay, well, I'm in remission from endo. I'm like, but my body doesn't work. This makes me really mad because like, did it have to be this way? And then I get on this high horse of like, well, maybe if we had more research into women's health and understanding why this happened to me, maybe this didn't have to happen to me. And I guess for as long as we still have these questions, like, it motivates me to just want to figure out, how do we keep people from getting to where I am today?
yeah. And I'm so grateful that that is, I'm not grateful that you went through all of that, but I'm so grateful that you're using this platform and your voice to share about that, because I still think it's so hush hush. Like I've talked to so many women who have different things going on, whether it's thyroid or endo or just dealing with gut things. And we don't talk, like we don't share that unless we really feel safe with whoever we're talking to. And so I feel like breaking down the stigma and some of the shame that we attach to that or whatever it is so important. And so I just have to say thank you, because that's one of the huge reasons I reached out to you. It was like, we have to have these conversations. Do you think that the endo, I know you also have chronic illness and dealing with some other things as well. Was
Mhm.
the endo the trigger for those things, or yeah, what's kind of going on for you today?
Yeah, so I live with two autoimmune diseases: lupus, which is a systemic inflammatory condition where your body's immune system attacks itself, attacks your body, different organs, blood cells, etc. And then I also have something called dermatomyositis, which is an autoimmune disease that causes inflammation of the muscles and the skin. So that presents as like muscle weakness and pain, skin rashes, all of that. And it's funny because so now my primary team is rheumatology, dermatology, immunology, and I always make it a point to mention to them, hey, they're finding in the research that like people with endometriosis end up with these things. And I can always
Mm,
tell they're kind of, I was like, yeah, okay, like great. Thanks for letting me know. But I bring it up because I think that we need to be doing a better job of kind of like triaging, I think, like high risk endometriosis patients for things that they may end up with down the line that we could be looking into
yes.
earlier. Like, I didn't have any autoimmune workup done until like years after all of my endo stuff. And I'm like, I wonder if we had done one when I presented with endo, if anything would have lit up that would have said, hey,
Mm,
let's keep an eye on this. Um, and so I know that there's this link, but there's not enough, I think, like pushing research that convinces my doctors that it's anything for us to even be thinking about, which is a little bit tough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like connecting all of that and like you said, triaging and helping be on the forefront versus like, oh gosh, now we're responding to all of these other things
Right.
that are going on. As you were talking, it has me thinking about, somebody who's listening right now that thinks maybe they have endometriosis and haven't been officially diagnosed, but just self suspects. What advice would you have for her right now?
Yeah, that's a really great question because there is a lot of self-diagnosis happening with this new era of social media, people sharing information, which is good and bad in its
Mhm.
own right. Knowing who's credible and who to listen
Yeah.
to and who not to is a little bit hard to kind of like make your way through all of the noise.
Yes.
But I will say, one is bringing this, whatever you've noticed, to your physician. I think we have a tendency as women to just accept abnormal things as normal.
Yeah.
Whether it's we've been conditioned, for example, when people are saying, "Oh, my period's really bad," it's like, "Oh, well, everybody's is."
Yes.
There's levels to that, right? So, are we talking about you're missing school, you're missing work, you're rearranging your schedule because you literally can't get out of bed? Like, that's a different situation than someone who has cramps and can take ibuprofen and function. So I think presenting anything that you notice is like not your norm, which is another hard thing because some people from their very first period, it's been that painful. And
Right.
so they've just been conditioned to think that that's
Yeah.
normal. But I think that with that being said, then just I think really describing like what does that look like for you when we're asked, are your menstrual cycles normal?
Mm.
Even if that's your normal, I think describing it as, well, I have a lot of pain and on these days I can't do XYZ, that might like raise a flag for a provider to say, hey, like that's not normal.
Right.
I know that you've been living with that as normal, but it isn't.
Right.
So I would say that's the first thing. I think the second would be, even if you do bring your concerns and they're dismissed, as hard as it is, because I fell victim to it as well, to say, well, I told the doctor and they didn't do anything about it. If it persists, then you should persist too. There is
Mm.
no shame. And I actually encourage people to get a second opinion, a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever it is, until you have someone that's willing to investigate what might be going on with you.
Yeah. Have you ever, you've been through this journey for a long time, and I'm sure you've come up against that, like resistance or just people being dismissive. Have you ever
Mhm.
reached a point where you just want to throw in the towel and give up? And what did you do to push through that?
Yes, I've reached that point with so many of the diagnoses that I have, but I think that's something in me where when I latch onto something, like you are not going to convince me otherwise
Mhm.
until like we have looked at everything and that's just who I am.
Yeah.
Um and so obviously having a clinical background to be able to kind of back up some of why I think what's going on and presenting it to my doctors, I tend to get dismissed less. Um I'm usually heard, but I'm the one that has to push for the things to move forward.
Mhm.
I will say that of all the serious things I've dealt with, whether it was endo, I had a heart condition that I was born with that didn't show symptoms till later in life,
Hmm.
autoimmune stuff, I was the driver in the seat of, "Hey, something's not right. Hey, we need to look into this. Hey, could it be XYZ?" And I hate that it is this way, but I realize that the way that our health system functions, we're not in this time where, like, you just show up to the doctor and it's like, "Help me," and they say, "Okay," and they give you a diagnosis and everything is good and fine.
Yeah.
There is some work on the patient's side that needs to be done, and I hate that that's the case because it shouldn't be, but there is. And when I say work, it's like understanding your body and what's normal for it and what's not, keeping what I call a symptom diary of like things that exacerbate how you're feeling or trigger how you're feeling, just being a really good historian for what's going on with you. And that's something that I think that we could be better at preparing patients to do because they can only give us the information. that they're able to understand to give, right? So if I say to someone as a nurse and I'm seeing them for their follow-up, like, how have you been feeling lately? That's so generic. Like, right? So right, like asking more pointed questions. How's your sleep been? Is there any, like, is it different? How's your mood? How's your appetite? All these things, because there's I find that so many of us have had all this weird stuff going on for so long that we kind of just are like,
Yeah.
that's just your normal now, right? So you don't even know that these things aren't normal anymore. So I think that like we need to do a better job as healthcare providers at like educating patients on how to articulate their bodies.
Yes. Yeah. I think you have such a good point there because I don't know what to say. Like, if they ask me how you've been feeling, I was like, oh, I guess I feel fine. But if they
Yeah.
were to get more specific with some of those questions, it does help prompt some of the symptoms that might be happening that I just don't know how to best put into English. And
Yeah.
so,
No, that's absolutely it. Because a lot of people, they start with their primary care doctor, whether it's just their yearly physical and they're checking in and how's everything been. And our go-to is always just like, it's been fine, it's been good. I keep a very detailed diary, probably like obsessive, like spreadsheet symptoms, all of that. And I'll catch myself being like, oh, I've been fine. And then I'll open my calendar. I'm like, wait, I had like a migraine every day for like the last 3 weeks. Like, no, I haven't been, I haven't been fine.
yeah.
So I think having something like tangible to like
Mhm.
present is always really helpful.
That's a super helpful tip because I always love tactical advice that we can give. And especially
Mhm.
for women who, like, I don't love confrontation. And sometimes I don't feel like I'm educated enough to say, no, gosh, I don't think, we should push for this or whatever the case. And so I think that's helpful because if you have something to kind of back it up with, then maybe that gives you a different, discussion point. So I love that. Do you have any additional tips that you can give that you've found to be super helpful when you're advocating for yourself throughout this process?
Yeah, I am a huge, huge advocate for shared decision making in medicine. And that means that my provider
Mhm.
and me as the patient, we're working together to come up with the next steps, solution, plan, whatever it is. I would say to people that if you feel like you're in a provider patient relationship where it is not a shared decision making relationship, it's more of like a dictator, like, I'm going to tell you what to do relationship, that is, I don't think that's a healthy way to communicate with our providers. We're a team, right? And I know a lot of times it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to be like conscious of. We, I hate to say this, but like, we're kind of interviewing physicians to decide, like, is this someone that I want to be on my care team?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so I think we approach it with this is who I was assigned to. So, like, this is who I have to work with. And that's not the case. Right. Like, it's a relationship that's like any other relationship. And I might even say it's one that's even like more intimate because of the things that you're dealing with, whether it's pain or mental health issues. It has to be someone that you really can like trust and communicate with. And so I think going into new doctor's appointments or even ongoing appointments saying, is this actually a good fit, right? Like, is this a provider that I'm like scared to bring things up to, that I'm scared to make suggestions about, that I feel like dismisses me? Like, if this isn't a good fit, I should move on to someone else. And I think people need to hear that more, that they're not stuck with any provider patient relationship that like doesn't work for them, right?
Yes.
And then another one I would say is, as as you're able to, I know everyone has really different work schedules and commitments, but bringing someone with you to appointments I find is really helpful. For me, it's my husband. He comes to everything with me. And I hate that I feel this way, but I do feel like I'm taken more seriously and more validated when he's
Mm.
there with me. Kind of setting this foundation of like, there are two people here that are on the same page.
Mhm.
Him and I. It's us, not versus you, but like we're in this together. And so like he's gonna ask questions and he's as engaged in this as me. It's a lot harder to like brush off two people.
Yeah.
Right? That are presenting the same things and him saying, no, this isn't her normal. This is not what she's usually like. So when I say bring someone that knows you well to
Yeah.
say, no, her saying she's tired all the time, like you don't understand. She's usually this and like this is what I'm seeing. And going back to that provider relationship, all of my doctors, and I love that they do this, they always ask him, what have you noticed? Because he
Mm,
notices things that I don't always
sure.
notice, right? Like, am I moody? Am I been irritable? Am I sleeping more? Am I taking naps? And he'll be like, well, like I noticed that usually she wants to go out to eat after dinner, after work, but for the last couple weeks she's just been too tired too, and we haven't been doing as much. Like that's such valuable information.
Yeah.
So I feel like bringing someone who knows you well and can vouch
Mhm.
for like what your normal is really helpful. For one, encouragement and like confidence in presenting the symptoms to someone, but also as a second set of ears of
Yeah.
what you're being told back, right? Sometimes we leave
Right.
these appointments and you're like, did they really say that to me? Like, did I
Yeah.
did I get that right? Right? Like, was that a weird interaction? Like, did he blow me off? And you just kind of you start like gaslighting yourself, like maybe it didn't go that way. But we debrief after every appointment. Okay, how did that go? What did they say? How did you take that? What did you take from that? Okay, so what do we think our next steps are?
Mhm.
And I think having a partner, whether it's a friend, a
Yeah.
parent, a partner, just helps you feel a lot more confident, I
Yeah.
think, in navigating what can be an intimidating situation.
Yes, I was just going to say that. I think for me, it would just give a little extra validation, and having that gives you a sense of confidence of being able to speak up. Because if it's just me and the provider, there's a level of intimidation there, whether
Absolutely.
it's brought on by them or me, it doesn't really matter. But having
Yeah.
that second person is certainly helpful. So I really appreciate that, as well as, having this like shared experience with the provider. I can't remember how you worded it, but it was
Fair
so perfect.
decision making.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you. As you've been through years of this and just going through it, what has helped you personally to stay sane? Because I feel
The
like
day, the month, the administration. No. Uh, well, journaling is a big one for me, which is why I wrote my book. Thank you for bringing that up because it was like a labor of love from a place of feeling like I didn't have any resources that really spoke to the things that I needed to work through.
yeah.
Living with something that's chronic and changes your day to day changes you as a person, and dealing with that process of identifying who am I now? What does this mean? And what do I want out of my relationships? And what does my future look like? I found that the like guided journals that I would use were not helpful. Like the prompts weren't right. They didn't speak to me. I'm a Christian, so I had one that was like faith focused, and then I had one that was focused on like self love and self care. And I'm like, but there's this huge gap of things that I deal with as someone with a chronic condition that neither of these speak to.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where my desire to write Part of You, Not All of You came from of like, how do we like ask the hard questions that someone may not want to ask themselves and give them a safe place to kind of process and work through this stuff. So journaling is big for me.
Yeah.
I like it for a couple reasons. One, to just like process and get everything out. But I also find it a good like timestamp roadmap of like where I've been and what I've overcome, which is
Mm.
always really helpful to see. It right? It can feel
Yeah.
like when you had years and years and years and years of chronic things that like you plateau and nothing's gotten better and nothing's changed. And then I'll like read back on like last year's journal entries and I'm like, oh my God, like this is where I was and this is how bad I felt. And this is like, look where I am now. So I think having tangible things to look back on to say, no, you're not stagnant. Yes, you've made improvement. And it's not linear, but like it hasn't all stayed the same is really,
Mhm.
really important for me to keep me encouraged to continue
Yeah.
on each day.
Yeah, I love that historical reference,
Yeah.
and just kind of responding to some of those questions, and then, like you say, it just gives you such a good look back. And that I find that even for myself, and I don't have nearly haven't experienced the chronic illnesses that you have, but even just sometimes getting in my own head so much, and then you look back over the last year and like, gosh, I did more than I thought I did. Are you planning on writing more books? Like, is this part of kind of your soul's excavation, if you will? And is that on the horizon for the future?
Yes, I mean, I would love to write more books. Kind of in that same lane, I like to create tools for people
Mm.
that one make them feel connected and not alone, and two give them a space to just like process. And so, what that looks like for my next book, I'm not sure. Interestingly enough, a lot of people that just support me in my life who do not have a chronic illness bought my book and were like, I found these prompts really helpful for me. So
Mm.
I've toyed with the idea of just like a generic guided journal to help all kinds of people process. But I am someone who I can only like write and create out of like inspiration. I'm not someone who can like I have to really feel it. Like I have to it
Mhm.
has to be like, "Oh, I want to do this right now." One, and two, like to be in a place personally where I feel like I can speak to people in a way that's going to be helpful to them. And this last year I've been so deep in my autoimmune stuff that I know personally that like I have not been the most optimistic person, and for good reason. I was dealing with a lot of really heavy stuff, and I'm like, if I
Yeah.
wrote a book right now and I read it a year later, this is not gonna be the voice that I want people to hear. So, like, now's probably not the time to be to be
Yeah.
going through a creative process. So I've kinda just been waiting to get to a point where I feel like what I have to say would be encouraging to people, and until I
Mhm.
can say that, it won't feel very authentic to me to write just to write.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think you're really smart to weigh that out and to yeah, I think there's different seasons for things, and sometimes we push through
Mhm.
in an attempt to try to check a box, and I really appreciate that you have the self-awareness to kind of pause in that. Um, with all of what you're discovering, lupus, and I can't remember the name, it's a long name.
Horrible.
Yes. Um, do you do you feel optimistic about the future right now? And I guess I'm not trying to paint a bad picture. I just am curious like where you're at in the journey and in the process right now.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I love that question because I feel like when you live with these chronic things, it really is hard to see like any light at the end of any tunnel. For me specifically, and where I am right now in this autoimmune journey, I do have a lot of hope. We're at a time in medicine where we're learning so much more about like biologics and how we can use the body's own resources to create ways to attack these things that aren't supposed to be here. So it's like a really interesting time in medicine.
Mhm.
On the pharmacological side, especially where there's just like new therapies coming out all the time, where I couldn't say that 10 years ago. So, like, one
Mhm.
of the drugs I'm on for lupus has only been around for about 11 years, and we haven't had another one FDA approved in that time. Whereas right now, there's so much coming through the pipeline. So, that gives me a lot of hope, knowing that I'll
Mhm.
have options. But also, I feel hope in that the conversations that we're having around women's health research are ones that I've been in the advocacy space for the last about 8 years now. And the focus on research to actually understand women's bodies is being so heavily championed and pushed. And that makes me really excited because that's a big part of me having hope for my future is having
Yeah.
hope in the medicine that's coming, right? And like, the way that we're treating women when it comes to healthcare and the resources that I'm going to have available for me in my future. I'm only 39. I have decades left, God willing, of navigating health and different stages, whether it's perimenopause or menopause, and like knowing that there are people championing ways and processes and research to understand these things more does give me a lot of hope because I think probably if you talked to me like 15, 20 years ago when no one was
Mhm.
when these conversations weren't mainstream, I would probably tell you, "No, I don't feel very hopeful. Nobody cares about this. I'm just gonna have to figure it out for myself," where I don't feel that way now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, that you feel that because I'm starting to notice that as well. It's nowhere near where, of course, it
Yeah.
should be, not by a long shot, but at least there's some attention on it. There's a little bit more there, and like you said, there's some really interesting things I think happening in medicine. So hopefully, we'll start to see some positive shifts.
Yeah. I
Um,
think we will, and I
yeah.
I feel like if I don't hold on to that hope that we will, like, how else can I live the day to day of someone whose life is dependent on what we
Yeah.
discover in medicine? Like, if I'm
Yeah.
not hopeful about that, I don't know how I get through the day.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really important to hold on to,
Yeah.
those glimmers.
Mhm.
Um, I know we're getting close to time, so just a couple more
Yeah.
things. I want to kind of wrap up just with, if there's a woman out there who's kind of hearing this, like it's all in your head
Mhm.
narrative, or not narrative, but like, she's being told that by her doctors.
Mhm.
What kind of piece of advice you have for her?
I would tell her that she knows her body better than anybody else does, and to remember that and feel confident in that when she's speaking about herself. And that can be hard to do, especially if you're meeting multiple people telling you that it's not real. But I like to say that our body is really good at speaking to us. I mean, they're such crazy creatures where all the compensating that happens when things are wrong to let us know, like, hey, this is wrong. Like, we can't ignore those things, right? Pain's one
Yeah.
of them. How we're feeling mentally is one of them. So I always like to say, if you're feeling it, it is true and it is happening, right? We may
Mm,
not know why, and we may not have a word for the why, but it's not because it's not happening. We just may not be able
yeah,
to describe why it's happening, but, like, if you are feeling it, it is happening. And I
that's
think
so
just
good.
remembering that and validating yourself in that, and, like, I'm not making this up. Like, I know, like, I am in my body and I'm the only one that is, and if I'm saying that it's true, like, it is true.
Yeah. That's so needed, that message out there for so many. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
I have a tradition on this podcast where I ask the guest to leave a quote for the next guest, not knowing who it is. So I'd like to share with you the quote that was left from the last guest and then give you the opportunity to do the same.
Sure.
So my last guest shared, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the future."
Wow. I love that.
Yeah,
That's so
love
good.
that too.
So good.
I love to see what might come up for you. It could be a quote or just something that you'd like to leave for the next guest.
Yeah. I would like to leave for the next guest that you are doing so much better than you probably think that you are. That if
Mm.
somebody were on the outside looking into how you're navigating whatever hard thing it is, they would be impressed by how you're handling it, and that you may not see that right now, but in time you will.
Mm. Oh, that almost gets me in the emotions. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
That's so beautiful. So many women need to hear that. Gosh, Jenneh, this has been so amazing. I can't tell you how grateful I am for you and your time and your advocacy and your voice. It's so needed by so many, more than you will ever know. And your impact is so wide reaching. And just thank you for being here today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was so good to chat with you.
Thank you for tuning into the show today. And before you go, I just have one quick favor to ask of you. There is a really simple way that you can help support me and help support this show, and that is to hit that follow button on whatever app you're listening to the show on. I'm trying really hard to level up the content and deliver unique value and amazing guests, and just hitting that follow button is the magic that will help continue to empower that. And remember that the world deserves to hear your voice and your stories, and you deserve a place at the top.